Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Socially Radical Guitarists. Song you heard just now was Coven from Thornhill's album The Dark Pool. Um, Very nihilistic lyrics talking about anxiety and using that North African sound to get that point across. Very beautiful music. So we're here with Rainer Shea. He's back, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about the debate he had with the Infrared Show Haas. So, Rainer Shea, how did you end up on that debate? How did it start? What like how did you get there?
People who, like me, started insisting that I go on there, and I felt like I owed it to them.
Oh, okay. I guess so your followers kind of just push you on it. So it was just kind of going on the Discord, I guess, and then talking through the Discord. Is that how it
Yeah,
working? Okay. All right. Um, how did you feel about the debate? Did you learn anything from Haas? Did you learn
I,
anything in general? And how do you
yeah,
think you did?
yeah. I learned some things, but he showed that he has considerable knowledge on the nature of the proletariat. But I felt like he was even using that as a straw man, because there's one point where he extensively recited this knowledge about how the proletariat is the only revolutionary class, and about how the proletariat is not necessarily the poorest facet of society. It's simply the facet of the society that is responsible for, like, doing the labor, and that was totally besides the point. I felt like he was going into so much detail in order to add perceived credibility to his point, which, well, let's see, what was his point? What was he trying to argue in that moment? Basically, it was that the colonized on this continent should not be viewed as the primary arbiters of proletarian revolution. And I don't see why he would argue that, because it's uncontroversial to say. It's an objective fact that a disproportionate amount of proletarians on this continent are the same people who have been screwed over by colonialism. Like, that's true by default, because they have less privilege. You can quabble about statistics, but that's the objective reality. And that there was uh, when it comes to that, there was a similar point that he made earlier in the exchange, where he claimed that in most parts of what's now called the United States, it would be unfeasible, or at least in a good part of what's now called the United States, it would be unfeasible for all the land to be returned to the jurisdiction of the indigenous tribes, because indigenous people don't make up very much of the population there. And he said that in response to my example of something like half of Oklahoma right now currently living under the jurisdiction of these several First Nations. They got their land returned last year. And he claimed that this has only been able to work in this last year in that part of Oklahoma, because indigenous people make up an especially high amount of the population. But then I looked at the statistics for that eastern half of Oklahoma, and it turns out whites are the majority demographic in pretty much all of the localities there. Whites are still, it's still predominantly white. And obviously, these white people are not being deported, they're not being persecuted. The governance is not dysfunctional because a minority ethnic group holds jurisdiction over it. It's still democratic insofar as that's possible under capitalism, and that's going to be the case in all the other places where the tribes regain full jurisdiction over the land that was stolen from them. It's even more so going to be the case when socialism is allowed to develop there.
Yeah. Um, yeah, a lot of there are a lot of problems with the way Oz debates and the way he gives information. He is a Marxist when it's convenient, and he becomes an idealist, a Hegelian, and sometimes he becomes a Duginist whenever it's convenient to argue against Marxist points.
A
So,
Duginist. That's
yeah,
that's a that's
there are times when he's making moral relativist points. For example, many of the times that I noticed in the debate was when uh, you are arguing about morality being important, and he was saying that material is more important than moral. But actually, he'll find that Marx and Engels were never moral relativists. Dugin was a moral relativist. He would say things like the left and right are just on the periphery. It doesn't matter where it is; they're just on the periphery of liberalism. It's just something to oppose liberalism, and that really the third political theory, fascism, and the second political theory, Marxism, were really just peripheries to try to oppose liberalism and get back to tradition. Those are some of the arguments that Dugin would make. So that's moral relativism, actually, if you think about it for a moment. And that's at times when it's convenient, he'll go there. Then he'll go to idealism. Then he'll go to Marx. Whatever, it depends on what the argument is that his opponent is making.
okay.
Yeah.
So it doesn't sound coherent. It sounds like this is somebody with an agenda who is trying to push that agenda in any way that they can. And when I say this, I feel like it's important to examine what kind of agenda am I accusing him and people of his ilk of having. It's the basic belief that class reductionism is essentially correct. I was at a racial justice rally today, and the speaker was decrying what they described as the class reductionist position that can give white people self-perceived moral license to dismiss any given racial justice issue because they claim that it's all going to be solved if class issues are addressed. And that's just not scientifically correct. That's not the kind of mindset that leftists should have. I don't even know how many of these people are actually leftists. I don't know how many of these people can credibly be called Marxists if that's the kind of position they take. And obviously, people, Marxist Leninists, they've all developed to a certain point. They've all had to go through a certain series of ideological hurdles to even get to being called Marxist. So they have better consciousness than most people by default. But a lot of them in this country still choose to hold on to this concept of U.S. patriotism being defensible. Yeah, that's where the class reductionism comes in.
Yeah. You know, from a material standpoint, racial hierarchy and gender hierarchy is a rule and a method of rule of capitalism. They're inseparable from capitalism because the capitalists, by default, need to find a way to split the workers. And making material differences among the white, black, Asian is how they do it. Particularly, they make it more pronounced even in the settler colonies because that's absolutely necessary and essential to justify colonial rule. Um, we'll talk about things like Dave Chappelle's comedy, but his comedy is normal comedy. That's the kind of comedy that's always been spread by many comedians, and there's actually an underlying reason for that. to make racial jokes, to make gender jokes, those kind of jokes. It's a way of reinforcing those stereotypes and reinforcing the racial hierarchy, the gender hierarchy, ideologically among the masses. It's a way of continuing to split them. So it's not a material argument. Of course, it's not a moral argument, but it's also not a material argument. They are, in many ways, yeah, you're right, that they are dismissing that part of the conditions. And when it comes to U.S. patriotism, I had made a joke before about us calling somebody else a slave for condemning the American flag, while he himself is an Arab.
What?
Yes,
What?
yeah. Well, I mean, he said that about Luna Oy, so that was just one remark that I made in a previous episode. Um, so let's go to the argument about the land reparations. Do you generally feel, as Haas does, that the white working class by and large in America is not interested in reconciliation or justice in those terms?
It's I feel like it's a complicated question, because I feel like it would be undialectical to conclude that the white working class is not capable of being radicalized by this ever increasing inequality. When the book Settlers made that prediction in regards to the onset of neoliberalism and how that would affect the consciousness of the white working class, that came across as like not coming from a scientific perspective, more from an emotional perspective. Like white workers have so often been complicit in betraying the colonized working class in this country. So why would they ally with us now? But I feel like we need to be more nuanced. Some of them will, some of them won't. Obviously, the working class people who have taken the white nationalist side won't. But there are plenty of people of all colors who are capable of aligning with the right side.
Okay, all right, yeah, that's interesting. That's yeah, that's a very good point, very good citation. Settlers. The conditions are getting worse for everybody. Um, that's definitely an objective fact. It's getting worse for everybody. And I believe that's also why these movements emerge, the infrared show, and because they're beginning to realize that um, uh, there has to be some sort of redress for the conditions as they deteriorate for everybody. So it's a question who their message is for and what they're really trying to say, but we digress on that and we leave that open for debate. So I think one point that was kind of interesting that Haz has made is that the most oppressed class or the most oppressed group is not necessarily the most revolutionary. Do you agree with that statement? Why or why not?
Well, it's basically correct in that the proletariat, they actually have privilege relative to the people who are not even able to have that privilege of being proletarians, the people who are out of work and on the streets, and so that's the reality that revolutionaries always
But does
tend
that
to.
change their relationship to the means of production if they become part of the reserve labor force?
Well, uh, I don't know how true that is, but obviously they're no longer part of the proletariat, or at least their position changes, and so that's the that's the basic reality that oppressed classes have to work out throughout history whenever they're trying to carry out a revolution. Lenin concluded that it's the proletariat that's the most qualified to facilitate the revolution. I feel like it's important for us to acknowledge this. But when somebody like Has points out a fact like this, they have an agenda behind it. They have a racial agenda behind what they're saying. What they're saying is that the colonized peoples on this continent should not they should not be the ones that we listen to. We should listen to what he describes as the revolutionary class, which is largely white people who are getting steered in the direction of U.S. socialist patriotism. And he's acting like socialist patriotism should be the default when it's not. We can choose to reject this national identity that's inextricably tied to settler colonialism and carve out, embrace new identities. I don't feel comfortable considering myself an American. I feel more connected to the Irish identity.
Interesting. There was something very interesting that happened during that debate, concerning, your family and other things like that. If you don't want to delve into it, that's fine. But just a question about the fact that you have to give out money to your family while you're a student. And he had said that you're in the middle class because of that as a student. Do you still agree with that statement largely, or do you think there's more to your situation than that?
We're a working class family here, and the income that we get from my financial aid is a little bit of a bonus. I doubt that my financial aid would be so important or demanded as much if we were in a more comfortable position. So like when you're making this kind of rhetoric, I feel like it's a lot of the time splitting hairs, like trying to discredit somebody like me by claiming that I'm not as privileged. I'm more privileged than I could be, which is obviously true. That's true for pretty much everybody. And so I feel like it's trying to point out some contradiction to paint me as less credible than I am. And I feel like he was aware, kind of acknowledging that he's similarly privileged to me, but by virtue of the fact that he's also able to come up with the time to engage in these kinds of discussions. He's able to make a career off of content creation like I am.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to discuss about whether, when you're creating your own content, if you are working, you control the means of your own production to a little bit. You are technically petty bourgeois, but the background you came from, I wouldn't say that's working class if you're being relied on for financial aid from your parents. Um, uh, just from a dialectical standpoint, but that will let Haas go to idealism and Marxism wherever you will. Um, uh, Now, what is your final message to the people of America, the people of Canada, and all other people of nations with the settler colonial background? Like, what was the main message you're trying to get across in the debate? What's the main message you want to get across to people living in settler colonial conditions?
Well, that we need to shake off the beliefs that we've always been told are true about who we are, about what the nature of our civilization is. There's this sense that's ingrained into us at birth that there's no alternative to settler colonialism. That even if we are willing to acknowledge that the colonized are oppressed, we're simultaneously encouraged to ignore that, compartmentalize this by at the same time calling ourselves American patriots. And we need to shake off this backwards label, shake off this backwards thinking so that we can unite with the decolonial movement and be principled in that uniting with the movement. Because I've encountered so many opportunists who simultaneously oppose the idea of returning full jurisdiction and full self-determination for these nations while claiming that they're for decolonization. At that point, decolonization has no real meaning by the definition you're going by. You're just saying it to virtue signal. We should not virtue signaling should not be what we're trying to do. We're trying to move forward this movement with principle.
Yes, that's an amazing way to conclude. This the message that you were telling. Um, yes, the important thing that Lenin did mention in many of his writings is that it is highly important to tell the working class the truth. So the truth has to be told, and in many ways, the settler colonial conditions are the truth, and those things have to be addressed, one way or the other. And now, with that, we're going to conclude our discussion, and we're going to go out first with the outro, and then with the song. Rainer Shea picked. What song are we picking?
Oh, it's Going to a Town. It's about anti-Americanism.
Yes, and Going to a Town, incidentally, has 10 million listens on Spotify. So you're wondering whether the anti-American message can't resonate with a multinational nation when there's 10 million listens on Spotify for a song like that. So that's my 10 cents, and that's it. We're going to have our outro and a song, and then that'll be it. See you next week.